Hello, folks. It's Scott McArthur here, and welcome to episode 7. Can you believe that? Episode 7 of Artifact Live Storytelling. Thanks again for all the feedback and interaction last week. It was amazing, and I'm feeling quite chuffed actually, because you've asked me some difficult questions, which I'm happy about. But nevertheless, it's all very, very useful. Now, this week, I promised you we would focus on something different, and what we're actually going to be doing is looking at, let me just make sure the chat's on, there we go. We're going to be looking at art, and like, I mean, I have a habit of saying this, don't I? But I think every week I've said it almost. I'm only going to be able to scratch the surface of this today, but I'm delighted to say we've got a special guest who I will unveil soon. Who is one of my long-term collaborators in this field, and he's going to share some ideas and thoughts with us. We're having some issues with sound this week, so if someone could just let me know if the sound's working, please, that would be much appreciated, because it is a bit ropey. Some people seem to be getting it. I think it's working on Facebook okay, but could someone just confirm for me, please, if you don't mind, that the sound is working. If you can even just give me a thumbs up or something, that would be helpful, because it's something that we got that wrong once before, didn't we? Good. Thank you, Doug. Thank you very much. That's YouTube is working. Thank you very much. So to get on with this, I went on for an hour last week. There's even more danger of me going on longer this week, so I'm going to try and keep it to 45 minutes. But it's such an exciting subject and such a complex subject in some ways that we could literally talk about it all night. But let's dive into this. Now, my guest this week is a fella called David Gifford, and David is sitting in the wings as we speak, ready to jump in. But I'm going to use one of his images that he did for us ages ago. I think it was when we were working at the Phoenix Group, David, which is an insurance company in Whittle in Birmingham, and it must be 12, 13 years ago, I think we did this. Those of you who were here last week, you'll know what I'm going to talk about in a minute. Those of you who weren't, this will completely confuse you. So at the end of this, I will go back and I'll give you a link so you can go back and watch previous weeks, because what I'd also try to do is create a bridge between each episode. But if you remember the exercise we did about the dog in the yard, and this is an exercise that I think summarizes the difficulty of communicating and getting points across to people. Well, there was one episode that I did that, one event I did that with David in the room. And I think it was the senior guys from the Phoenix Group. So they're a big reinsurance company. It doesn't matter what they do, but we were drawing, or rather David was drawing things live in the room. And one of the guys, this was his dog in the yard. Now, what you've got there is a great example of just how easy it is for us to understand how all of us see things differently when we talk, when we just use words, when we just use narrative in our stories. So this was the wee dog there is a little Scotty dog, and the chap who got David to draw this I think he was the CEO actually, and he said, well, I wanted a Scotty dog because you were presenting, Scott, so fair enough. And then the yard, and the yard here really sums up the challenge that we have often in this space. Remember last week we spoke about how the word yard means different things in the UK as it does in the United States. Well, this is what he saw. He saw a rather phallic-looking yard of ale with a little dog in it. So that, I think, beautifully forms a bridge between what we spoke about last week and what we're going to speak about this week. So I hope, and I've had some super feedback on the exercise. I think it's getting used already by other people, which I'm delighted about. It's a great exercise. As I say, if you've not seen it, tune into last week's episode on YouTube and you'll be able to see it. So where did this all come from and where did it all start? Now, I'm going to bring David in now because I know David has got particular perception on this, but I'm going to show you, just before I do that, I'm going to show you one of my absolute favorite images. And this was only discovered a few years ago. It's from France, a place called Chauvet, and it's from not place called Chauvet, it's discovered by a chap called Chauvet in France. And this was one of the classic images that was discovered. This is one of the oldest images ever found in human history. I'll just show you that and then have a look at it. See what you can see there. And I'll get David. I'll bring David in a minute. He can introduce himself in a minute. But this picture was found on a wall deep inside a cave. Now they've tried to date these things, and they're between 35 and 60,000 years ago. But what I love about this, and the whole point of today is about how stories can come from images and can be seen in images. If you look at the digits on this hand, it's a child's hand. If you look at the digit next to the thumb, it's a little bit twisted. So this child had a broken finger, and yet they were doing these marks on the wall. And I think it's like a time capsule that's come through the decades to show us what was going on in that little person's life. We don't know if it was a boy or a girl. I think it's quite beautiful. And if you've never seen or heard of Chauvet Caves, there is a terrific film which I'll talk about in the description of the video when we post it live. It's called Cave of Forgotten Dreams by the brilliant Werner Herzog. But David, I'm going to put you on now, mate. So I'm going to introduce you all to David. This is David. Now let me just get rid of that image, David, unless you want to talk over it, David. Hi, David. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for having me, Scott.
Absolute pleasure. How long have we known each other?
I can't see myself. I can only see the picture. Well,
yeah, I need to. I would have to take it off. There you go. You can see yourself now. So how long have we worked together? It must be. Oh, it's a scary amount of time.
Since 2006, I think. I think it was 2000. I think that's when we did Phoenix.
Was it?
It might have been. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember drawing those pictures? The dog in the yard one.
I do. Yeah. And there was a guy that was it was a fantastic. The whole job was fantastic. It was like loads of clients and loads of great time. So it was yeah.
So tell us a little bit about yourself in terms of your background, David, and how you got to be this.
Well, I'm a medical. Oh, I've gone big now. I'm an illustrator. That's how I started out, and I got a degree in zoology, and then I did scientific illustration, and I started out as a medical illustrator, and I was doing loads of science and medical books. I'm slightly and a bit nerdy, and I loved it. And then in 6, Atos called me in and said, "We're looking for artists who can draw it alive." And I thought, well, that's very easy. So we all, it was about 10 of us or something. I can't remember in the room with and was there. And they chose 2 of us, and I was one of them. But it was very easy. I thought, well, this is much fun. You meet people, you get to sit down and listen to them, and then you do some drawings. Didn't seem very difficult, and it sort of grew from there. And we kind of developed it, and we've had a huge amount of fun with clients because they love drawing. They love the whole process of being listened, of seeing you draw, and you be, hopefully humorous and so it's and of course I get to work with people like yourself, and that's always it's always just fun. It's a way of working with clients, and a great way of trying to understand and to think about issues and change and all the rest of it. It's
so. Can I ask?
You think?
Well, can I ask you a question, because
what's it been like for you?
Well, yeah. I think it would be helpful if what's your view on that Chauvet Cave picture? I mean,
this is you're touching on one of my favorite subjects, which is early and how we developed. It's just incredible to think how old these are. I mean, you're talking about maybe 60,000 years, but they're older paintings. And I was showing a rock with the little cross hatching on it, about maybe 73,000 years old. And they were paint. They were seeing red ochre, and we know that people have been using red ochre as a pigment for about 300. Now, that means that we've been painting, whether it's on ourselves or on trees or, where we've been painting for about 300,000 years. We have only been writing for a few years. So we've been using words.
Yes.
And maybe words for the last few hundred.
Yes.
So, but we paint really deep in how we think and how we move around us, and just how we strategize. I mean, it's salty, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't.
How we think and how we work out our problems. We do them visually, and obviously, stories are complete, but the visual helps us think about the story, and that's.
Let me take over again for a minute or two, David. I'll bring you back on that because
what's amazing is when you put me full screen, I'm just it's a little bit like you're getting up morning and you sort of look at yourself and you think, and you might be talking to yourself or not. So it's actually to be. I quite like Zoom because you can minimize yourself and put yourself in a corner and just slightly ignore. But when you've got yourself full screen and you just go, who on earth is that?
It took me a few women. I can help you there. Look, watch. There you go. You were happy.
Oh, that's so much better. I'm looking at you. That's fine. I'm happy now.
So thanks for joining us, Tara, over on LinkedIn. Lovely to meet you. Any questions, guys, let me know in the chat. But what I'll do now, David, is I'm going to talk through a couple of things that I experienced in my life with art and how I think it led me somehow to this place where I'm now using, lots of art in my work. And I think we need to go into I would personally like to dive into why art works, particularly in the context of complexity. But folks, I'd just like to show you another couple of pictures here that were absolutely, fundamental for me when I was growing up. And one of them is this, and this is, I was trying to get David to help me pronounce this earlier. I can't pronounce the artist's name. I'm really ashamed of myself. I'm like that character out of Friends. My French is about hee-haw, hee-haw, and I'm really embarrassed by it. And I worked for a French company for 15 years. It makes it even worse. But this is a scene from The Flood. And I came across this, first of all, believe it or not, in Andre Agassi's Autobiography. Now, if you don't know who Andre Agassi is, he was a very famous long-haired rock and roll tennis player who won Wimbledon a couple of times. But what we didn't know at the time was that he was very much, suffering from mental health. He had drug addiction issues. He had alcohol issues. He was bald, and he used to. The famous hair that he had transpires it wasn't even his hair. It was stitched into his head. It was he was a very complex character. Now, if you've never read or you like sport biography, I do recommend it. But this painting by the French painter that I can't pronounce, I think really, really, brings home what painting can do. So he saw himself as the character in the middle of this, holding on to the tree. And he felt like he was supporting, not only his family, which is depicted here by the female and the children down the bottom, and his father on his shoulders, but he felt that he was supporting more than that. He was supporting tennis, and he felt huge pressure from this. And he had this on his wall at night to remind him at the beginning what his life was like. Now, that clearly wasn't particularly healthy, but I think it got across, certainly to him. It helped him see that others had been in a similar circumstance to him. Try write that down. It takes a long time to explain it. But I think that's a painting. When I saw it, I thought, oh my goodness. And there's been a few since then I've used, mainly in learning and developing events in the past. And then more recently, when I've been doing mainly keynote speaking, I use this sort of image and often David's work, and I'll show you a couple of them as we progress, to actually get across some powerful but complex messages. And it's something that I don't think, or it's difficult for words to do. And having worked in the corporate world for the best part of 20 years now, and then before that in the scientific world, we're just not very good at it. It is a rare thing indeed to find somebody who can write in English or in another language that is very, very clear. And certainly in my experience of doing over 200 projects across the world with corporates, the biggest problem we ever had, and I'm sure David will remember some of these examples, was just trying to get everybody on the same page. And what paintings did was they did that. There was something about them across cultural. They worked because, you know, words sometimes don't translate. Even Scottish words don't translate into English sometimes. But when we were using these, whether it was working with a chemical company in China, or it was working with a Swedish bank, or a German automotive company, the images would work. Now, there were some differences, and I don't know, David, if you've got any examples from your experience. I've got a couple, but you might have better ones than me. But there are some colour issues, and different cultures have different perceptions of colour. They've got an extra blue in Russia, and there's also some weird stuff in different countries that you probably haven't come across, but there is some complexity. But nevertheless, I think, and I'm making this up, David, you might be able to help me with this. I reckon this cuts out, using images to try and help you with your stories, cuts down about at least 30 or 40% of what I call the noise, the confusion that you get if you just try to use words. And that's why it kind of astonishes me that we don't see more of these images at work. Despite the fact this has been on the market for the best part of 25 years as a strategic tool, I'm still not seeing it that often. I mean, you get the things like RSA Animate, which I think are terrific, but they're a bit lightweight. They're not into the sort of the real sense-making side of this. So, David, have you got a view on that in terms of particularly the sense-making part, but anything else I've spoken about there? Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I think for me, it feels like it's about problem solving. That the pictures can bring people together and allow them to. It's almost like having a table that they can chat, and they can talk, and they can work through problems, and the picture gives them that ability to something that they can chew over, that they can digest. They can almost put their problems onto the picture, or their dreams, or their aspirations, and they can then somehow and see a way forward. I remember doing the Redbridge primary back in 2007. That was fundamental to them, to doctors and ambulance workers and mental professionals, all of those people understanding what the policy was that the trust wanted to, and just by drawing pictures and cartoons and working with people, they could say, oh, well, I'm worried about this. Well, we don't want to do that. We can, and seeing how the GPs were very against something, and then they to get them on board. So it's just bringing people together, allowing them to talk, and have the conversation that you want them to have, to build stories, and just to share and to be heard. And I think that's the fundamental thing about the drawings, that they're not, they hopefully they work, and that you do them well, but they are about the conversation. They're about how you can people to think and to talk and to communicate the conversation.
Yes, that beautifully leads me to my first little story of the night, folks, as you expect me to do now. And this was one that it links beautifully to what David's just said, because I was involved, and I've not done this often, but I was involved in some mediation work. I mean, I used to do mediation when I was an HR professional, but I'm in full recovery now. I was asked by the HR director at the co-op if I could come in and help, because her and the finance director were just not getting on. In fact, the relationship was such that I think they were both fearful of their jobs. And so I went in. Her name was Helen. Still a friend of mine. I still know Helen. She's an interesting lady. She's formerly of M&S and Sainsbury's. She's now on the main board at the co-op. But and she said to me, she said, "Look, I don't really know how to do this, but could you bring one of your artists?" She always had this sort of quite, sorry, David, but she had quite a low view of artists for some reason. I could never get it, but she did.
Very nearly.
And she said, could you bring one of your artists? In other words, rather than saying, could you bring one of your experts, please? And I went in and we sat them in a room. Well, first of all, I interviewed them with the artist. It wasn't David, it was another artist. And we interviewed them about what their issues were. And the artist, she just drew, you know, what was being discussed and what they were telling me. And then we went out, we looked at the what she'd come up with. I had thoughts, what I had experienced from both of them. But then the key bit was we brought them together. And we sat them in this room and I said, right, okay, there's not many rules here, but we need to get to the bottom of this. You know, I think you both want to be successful. I think you both want to be, you know, working in this organization in the future. And I think you're actually both quite nice people. So there's no reason for this conflict. And they weren't able at that point on their own to put a finger on what the conflict was. Now, the image, I'm not allowed to show you the image because it's a copyright image of the co-op, and they're quite tight on some of their images. Funny enough, David, ones we did, they're not, but these ones which were about 2 months earlier, they were very tight on, so I can't show you it. But what happened was I had a flip chart, and these guys like David, I mean, they're brilliant. They draw these images almost live. I mean, well, David does draw them live, and sometimes they even color them live, so you get a proper image within hours or minutes sometimes of what you've been talking about. So the illustrator had been, you know, drawing, and she was using paints as well, watercolors, on a flip chart. So I turned it round, and on the image were two people, and they were slightly hunched over, and both of them had an elephant on their back. So right away, you can probably gather, guys, what do you think it was meaning? Anybody want to guess? You know, two people with elephants on their back. It's pretty obvious, but does anyone want to guess what you think's going on? Just while I have a drink of water. No, everybody's quiet this week. I've got my ghosts on YouTube again. You really need to tell me who you are. It's quite good. I quite like it, but you need to log in, I think, and get a username so you can come up on it, because I'd love to know your names, guys, because it's like interacting with you. Anyway, what these elephants were, there were elephants in the room. So there was the old metaphor and the old thing about, you know, what are the things we don't want to talk about. So that was a quite obvious part of the image. But what wasn't immediately obvious until you actually looked at it was what they were doing with their hands. They were both trying to reach to one another, but they were missing each other. They were just like trying to hold hands, but not quite. What's Doug said here? Doug, are you being mischievous again? A 20th century circus gone very wrong. Oh dear. Yeah, okay. They also make you laugh, some of these pictures. Thanks very much. What was actually happening was they were both trying to be friends. They were both trying to help each other, but they couldn't. And the reason they couldn't was this. The elephants were actually the performance criteria on which they were being measured. And of course, in many corporates, we don't know what each other's performance indicators are. So that meant that, you know, they were actually, when I investigated it with them, it turned out that one of them was being paid for individual targets and the other one was being paid on team targets. And not until that moment had they had the guts or the nerve or the capability to talk about what the issue was. Now, these two people still work together. They're not friends. They're positive colleagues. You know, they're not. I don't think they're ever going to be friends, but they've got to a point they now understand what the issue was. And I think it's a great example of how images can cut through some of the noise and some of the sort of the corporate BS that we all have to put up with. So I am very drawn to that sort of environment where we use images. And indeed, the next job I did at the co-op with David was where they asked us to help them with, they were basically doing some, well, you'll see it now, they've redesigned a lot of their local stores. And at the point that they were doing it, there were a whole load of things, if you remember, David, that they just couldn't talk about. They weren't allowed to talk about. And one of them, unbelievably, do you remember it, David? Sorry, that's an unfair question. Do you remember what the thing was? They couldn't talk about coffee. Do you remember? Because there was a conflict, because one of the co-op have got certain values, and I'm sure you know some of those values about sustainability and diversity and inclusion. But they've also got a commitment to helping their local franchises and local businesses to make money. And coffee was a humdinger because they had an agreement with Costa to do corporate brown water. And then they had an agreement with one of the fair trade coffee companies to do fair trade coffee. Not much better taste-wise, but nevertheless, it was fair trade. And the problem was that upstairs, they were saying to the leadership team that we were working with, because we were working with the leadership team in the junior board. There's about 3 or 4 boards at the co-op. So at the top board, we're very focused on profit. But we managed, David managed to draw some amazing pictures that just very subtly hinted at this problem. Can you believe it, that a corporate the size of the co-op has got such a problem internally with communication that it can't talk about coffee? You know, that was a classic example of how, you know, because of these interviews that we do, and I haven't explained how I've done this in the past, and I will do that with another picture. But because we don't have I don't know, is it the nerve or the experience or the ability to ask questions? And that's going to be a future theme. I just think it's weird, and it's a real problem in companies, and it's a real blocker for progress. And across my career, I've seen this, and it can be the most ridiculous little things. Anything to add there, David?
Stories are at the heart of everything that we do. So those two are love stories, and I do remember the job with the co-op. I have to say I did like them. I thought they were work with, so I do remember that.
Yeah.
But and it's the stories that drive everything. You know, they drive. You know, but it's the anecdote that just proves everything. So
yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. I'll stop for a minute, guys. Any questions? And I think we might even have one of the co-op people in. Hello. I'll not say your name just in case you don't want to say anything, because I got into trouble for mentioning somebody's name the other day that didn't want to speak. So I apologise. But has anyone got a question there that we could either ask me or David or both of us just before I move on to the next part? I do like your comment, Doug, about the elephant's been a 20th century circus gone wrong. What I will do next week, I will use the coffee example as a bridge. I'll not tell you what it's about yet next week, but I'll use it as a bridge because it actually fits quite nicely, David, to what we're going to do next week with the guys. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll move on, and I'm going to give you this is a big example of how I've used art along with storytelling to try and help organizations and critically individuals through challenging times. And of course, given, and I'm not going to say pivot, and I'm not going to say unprecedented anymore, I'm not going to say it again, but given where we're living at the moment, I think this is a time when, you know, art could come to the fore, but it's not at the moment. I'd like to see a lot more of it. But let me tell you about a company, and I've got permission to use this image, so it's not copyrighted like the other one I was mentioning earlier. I was asked, let me get this right. I'm not going to tell you how long ago it was because it's embarrassing how long ago it was. A long time ago, I was asked to help a high street brand who were at the time going through a massive transformation program, and after this day going through a massive transformation program. And that company was Marks and Spencer's. And I know there's a couple of M&S people on today, so thanks for joining us, and thanks very much for 20 years of working together. It's been amazing, and long may it continue. But this was a specific problem to the HR function, the human resources function. We used to call them functions. I don't know if we call them functions anymore. Anyway, this is a decent company, lovely people. I know them very, very well. But this was my first job with them, and I went in there with a guy called, David mentioned him earlier, a chap called Steve Whitler. And we went into this business, and we were going to try out this new methodology of drawing corporate strategies to try and help them really understand what their problems were. So we spent about I think it was about 9 weeks, and we took a diagonal slice through the organisation, and I think we must have interviewed the best part of 200 people about how they felt about the state of the company, how they felt about, how the company was behaving. Just put the chat back on, sorry. How they felt about the proposed new changes, etc., etc. And we ended up with this amazing picture. Now, it now looks quite old-fashioned, but in the title, I'll put it up. Hold on, I'll just put it on. This is it here. So this is the image. Now, don't worry if you can't read the bits. You don't need to be able to read them. I'm going to talk you through bits and pieces of it. But basically, we thought about, and this was long hours in the Premier Inn in Manchester, trying to work out, is there a metaphor for this business? Is there a way we could describe this business that they would all relate to? Well, one of the first things, and like all organizations have their language, mainly they have the corporate BS, but there's also often an underlying language that they use that everybody talks about, a word for the shop floor or a word for the bosses. Like you've probably heard things like, oh, he's from the mahogany row, or, there are phrases like that in every sort of the language of business. And in Marks and Spencer's at the time, and it's not as much there now, they used to speak a lot about theatre and being on stage when you were meeting the customer and when you were working with suppliers. So we had this idea of creating this three-dimensional, and this is obviously only one slice of it, this three-dimensional version of Shakespeare's Globe Theatre in London. And we had on this particular slice of it on the left-hand side, we had the state that they were in. So I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but in that, and you'll get this obviously when you get the YouTube copy of this, guys, you can maximize it on your screen and really see it. But what you've got there is you've got things like at the very top of the picture, you've got the Management Information System, MIS, and that was the sort of the old-fashioned system where there was multiple systems, multiple technologies, non-technologies. It was a bit like using an abacus. It was really out of date. And the guy next to them tried to get information, but he was fishing. He just didn't know what he was going to catch in any one day. And then HR itself was like, Heinz beans. It was 57 different varieties across the business. It was an absolute shambles. Go down another level, the spotlights. So the spotlights aren't shining on anything. That was because the learning and development policies just didn't work. They weren't helping anybody, etc. Now, I'm not going to do many more of this because I could literally talk all night. But then below that, there's another image, someone pointing to an image. This was an image that they had drawn by somebody who just drew it, then basically did it at home and sent it in. So they didn't consult with anybody. And everybody was going, what the hell is this image about? Because they couldn't see themselves in that image, right? So, and then the bottom was the big problem. They were drowning in paperwork. Everyone was tied to rules and regulations. That's the chains, I don't know if you can see them. And then right at the very bottom, you've got people, there's all this red ink on that paper. And then there's a little fella walking out the business with his time clock behind him. People were stealing time, not just customers, but also employees. So it was an absolute mess. They then wanted to go to the future, which is just the opposite of that. So it's quite clear about how information gets through the business. It's clear who L&D is shining their development opportunities on. It's clear how there's no leaks in the pipes now as you go up in the management information system. People have got a portal at the top. They're very clear. And at the bottom, people are talking about the business and thinking about where they can go next. And there's a single point of information at that point. And of course, you might notice it's not 100% clear in that simple image, but the left-hand side is much brighter, much lighter than the left-hand side. And that was all great. But the key bit was the bit in the middle of the image. They'd gone through a fairly standard kind of American type thing, as a lot of these companies do. They bring in the Tony Robbins or whatever motivational thing, and there was I'm definitely not going to tell the story. If you've never heard the starfish story, just put starfish into YouTube. I can't tell it anymore. It gives me the heebie-jeebies. It's a good story, but I've heard it so often I can't talk about it anymore. But below, you'll see there's a lady there, globalization, and there's a few people with their hands in the air. But then below it, there's an empty stage, and there's a wall on the right-hand side there. But what that was about was there was such a level of uncertainty from these 200 people that we interviewed that we couldn't decide how they were going to get the Tony Robbins stuff, the big wow stuff hadn't worked. But there was a gap. We couldn't fill the gap. No matter how many people we spoke to, we couldn't do it. And even when we showed them the initial cut of this image, which didn't have that blank space in it, people were saying, I'm not clear. So what we did was we took that image And then that brick wall became a single picture on its own. And we toured the two images. So we said to people, you know, what's stopping us getting from, you know, the current situation to where we want to be in the future? And I'll tell you what, they loved it, because they were looking for themselves in the pictures, trying to see, you know, where am I work on the shop floor? You know, where am I in here? Oh, there I am pulling a box. I'm looking exhausted on one side. And the other side, I'm wearing brighter clothes. I'm looking happier, etc., etc. And the chains are broken. There's fewer rules. But they still needed that help to understand, or to have that opportunity to share their deeper experiences. And that image, I mean, that ended up being a 3-month program, and that eventually led me to 18 years of a partnership with Marks and Spencer's, because I got so deeply into understanding that company that it was gold dust for me, because I got to know it really, really well. So that, I mean, I've just done, David, along with that, normally take 3 or 4 hours, but it you know, I've just done a brief that would normally take at least a couple of hours. I've done it in 10 minutes, but I hope you see how, you know, even if you're doing something for yourself, because in that image there are individuals who you can literally make out what they do. You know, there's the shop floor staff, there's the HR staff, there's the customers actually, and then there's the data staff. And if you show somebody an image, even if they hate you, and David, you'll definitely be able to support me in this because I know you've been there, even if they don't like you, they'll look on the image and they'll go, where am I? And you've got them. You've just got them. The minute they say, where am I? You know you've got them. What do you think of that, guys? Any thoughts on that image? Any questions? Let me just check the other platforms. What about your experience, David? Have you had anything similar to that? Well, I know you have, because we've done other ones similar to that, haven't we, together? Oh, your sound's gone. Hold on. It's a bit odd. I can't hear David. Can other people hear David? Try again, David. I've got you. Yeah. I've got you. Yeah. What were you going to say?
That's my fault. I was I had noises off on my phone, so I muted myself. I've definitely had lots of pushback, and particularly during creating a picture. People say, "Why are we creating a picture?" But what I loved about the Marks and Spencer's, and as you talked through it, it's just so easy to understand. You just look at it and you go, "Oh, I understand it. I get it." You know, there's the front stage, the front of a house. There's people over there. Scott's going to tell me, you know, all the kind of details, the nitty gritty, but you get it. It's like you can dive into a picture so easily. It's just so simple. If you get a manual or a graph, even a graph. I mean, we get lots of graphs in the news now. Do we understand them? They all go like that. Well, we should be terrified. But I mean, what does it mean? Whereas a story in a picture, you just go, yeah, I get it. That's great. Yeah. So there's those big visual metaphors. Fantastic.
Yeah, and the fact that I can remember the key strategy things. I mean, I don't sit and read M&S strategy documents every night, you know, but the fact by just looking at that document, I can remember what we were actually doing. You know, some of that was coming. Do you know, there's another good story. I need to tell another story, David. Sorry, there was another moment at M&S that was really funny, and I'm sure they won't mind me telling. I know there's a couple of you there, so just shout at me if you don't want me to tell this story, but I'm going to tell it. Taxis. What used to happen was they had such a poor payroll system. This is only in the late 90s, early noughties. So it's not 40 years ago. And they used to deliver the pay slips to each other, to the more out of the way offices. They used to do it by taxi. They had a fleet of taxis that used to go out every week, or every month rather, to deliver these pay slips. I mean, it was absolutely hilarious. And that in the picture, if I can just put it back on again, I don't know if you'll be able to see them. It's little, if you look where the spotlights are on the left-hand side of the image, you see little paper planes. Well, that was how it was. Basically, it was down to luck whether or not you got your pay slip in any one week if you worked in any of these organizations, the branches. So it was quite comedic. It was quite comedic. So, okay, now let me just check again on the chat. You're all very quiet this week, the opposite to last week. But I'm going to finish tonight just by, again, giving you something to think about that I think is it's really generative. And if you've got kids, you'll get this in a moment, right? One of the things that has emerged in the last 10 years mainly, they existed before, but there are a series of books now, hundreds of them, thousands of them, that are basically children's books, but they have strong messages for adults. And I love them. I absolutely love them. And I've got 2 young boys, and I buy them for the boys, and you can see them understanding the messages about friendship, or about, there's one I've got about diversity. I've got another one about what it's like to be blind. And the book is basically shades of black with Braille written on it. And it is incredibly powerful. And it gets the kids thinking about what it must feel like, to not have proper sight, full sight. But the ones that I really love include this sort of one. Now, this is an amazing book by Anneka Harris. Now, Anneka Harris, I don't know if you know Sam Harris. Sam Harris is one of the world's leading vloggers and podcasters. He's a neuroscientist and lifelong meditator. In fact, oh no, I can't. I'll put a sheet over it. One of the books I read every week is one of his books. It's a piece about meditation that he wrote, and I love it. But this is about the wonder of science, and it's extraordinary. And I mean, I'm not going to read it to you, but I'll show you some of the images. And I think that the beautiful use of color, of very limited words, just hits home. And there's a book called Sidewalk Flowers, which, if you've seen me speak, and certainly when I do most of my keynotes, I nearly always mention it. And it's a book that, to this day, it's only a little book. There's no. I don't know if it's in my shirt. It is. There you go. This book, Sidewalk Flowers. Now, this is a book about the contemporary age, and about what it's like if you're a child whose parents are caught in the digital, what I call the Zoom apocalypse these days, where people are, spending more of their time on their phone than they are with their kids. And there's no words in this book. There's no words in it. Just a little girl on the sheet. It's a bit like, remember Schindler's List, if you've seen Schindler's List, with the little girl in red. And it basically is the story of how she goes for a walk with her father, and everything she sees is in colour, and everything he sees or misses is in black and white. And when I first got this book, my God, it knocked me out, guys. It knocked me out. It's absolutely brilliant. And I think it gets across beautifully that, in terms of trying to communicate with your, with your colleagues, with your, your boss even, but more important than that, try to understand what's going on in society. I think we are missing a trick in terms of how we, I've said this in one of the previous episodes, I don't think we're telling enough stories at the moment. In fact, I think the way we behave now, and I have a picture here that I think really, really sums it up. Now, this one here, and obviously I'm talking about stories. This chap's talking about reading. A reading allows us to see and understand the world through the eyes of others. A good book is an empathy engine. I mean, geez, oh yeah. We need more empathy today than we've ever needed. And I don't think that's onomatopoeic. I think that's true. And I think we owe it to ourselves and to the rest of society to really try to tell more stories. We need to gather these stories. As I said in week 1, I think we're all good storytellers, like the cave painting right at the beginning. I think we're all good storytellers. And I think that is something we need to get back to. It's a bit like getting back to the default position, because we've always been storytellers, haven't we, David? We've always been storytellers.
Absolutely.
And whether we do it, whether we do it in art or we do it in more recently in words, it's something I think is a huge opportunity for us. So that's this week's show. Just before I thank David, I'm just going to check. Oh, thanks very much, Andy. That's good feedback. Thanks very much. You got this. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that. It would be nice to have you back, David, and maybe do some live drawing at some point, because watching you in action.
I'm probably happier live drawing than talking, actually. Understood.
You made the point of being a geek, and you made it well. So I'm going to finish. Just want to check, as I always do. Let me just check these. There's a few thank yous. Thanks, folks. Thank you very much. I'm always scared to get it wrong. We can maybe come back to that. I'm always scared I get it wrong. That's part of my mission, folks, because I think
Absolutely.
we cannot, we can all be good storytellers. And the reason I like my artifacts, the reason I like, this wall behind me and my books and everything round about me, they help me. And these pictures, the whole show this week's been about artifacts, the whole show. And it's something that I really think would help. I mean, I don't know if you saw it, I did a video with these 6 cubes, and I'll stick it in the comments. 6 cubes, and each one had a random picture on it. And the idea is the parent rolls the cubes, and however they land, that's the story you've got to tell. Now, I know that's just made up, but I tell you what, it's good practice for doing this sort of thing. So I will put it in the comments. It's good fun. So just before I finish, I'm going to show a little video that links to next week. But I'm going to say thank you to David. David, that was brilliant. And I know you're not at home, so you've dialed in from afar, which is much appreciated. And is there anything final you'd like to say, David? Where can people find you? Where can they find you?
Oh, you can definitely search me on LinkedIn, and I'm definitely on there. But I go by im.com. You can find me there. LinkedIn's pretty good, and you can put a link under the video or something if you want to. But I think the thing about stories is that we're all completely unique, and we all have our story to tell, and we can all draw. That's the other thing I'm passionate about. And then when you showed the child's hand, and it was a unique hand. Yes. It's the essence of the fact that was a unique person, who had just her own. I'm calling her. Was she a girl? No, I can't remember. We called her a girl. Did you call her a girl? I can't remember. But it's just that uniqueness, and that the fact that we are all special. We can all creative, and we can all produce something and tell that story.
Yes. Fantastic, David. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So I'm going to end, thank you, David. I'm going to end with a little video, and it forms a bridge, but it sets up for next week, because next week we're going to look at music. But I'm going to do 2. I'm going to try, it's always a dodgy thing to do more than one thing is not a good thing to do, but I'm going to try and also talk about editing next week, because one of the things I've learned in the last 3 months is that the edit, particularly when you're doing, broadcast stuff, this is obviously live. We can't do much about this. It's live. It's happening now. I can fiddle about with the captions and stuff, but I can't do very much else, as you probably notice. Hold on, let me get to the correct picture so I can show you. Yeah. So what this is a very, very short video that I've done. There's some of you who follow me on LinkedIn, etc., I might have seen it before. No apologies for that. I'm going to play it. I'll have a quick word about it, and then we'll finish. So just bear with it. It's only a minute or so, and it's quite funny, I think.
We can start with resonance.
About corporate soul healing,
yes,
and how music can help that happen, can make that, can manifest that. Yeah. How are you?
Well, polyphonic. I always say polyphonic.
Now, the way that is structured is actually not by accident, and it seems to be that the way storytelling is developing at the moment, and I'm talking about video storytelling, so it's the next, using images and all the rest at the next level. It seems to be that if you look at the big guys, the people who are really getting into this stuff, they put their best piece right at the start of the video. And it's weird, because it used to always be we would lead to something, and go ta-ta, and magic, they would call it the prestige. But these days, that bit at the beginning where my mad friend Miha, who's an incredible musician, and I'll talk about him more next week, when he bashed that gong and the whole room shook, it was hilarious. But guess what that does? I hope it did it for you. It grabs people's attention. So next week, we're going to touch on that, and we're going to talk about how music and editing can help work together to create great stories. So thanks very much for tuning in, everybody. It's been a pleasure as always. I've only done 50 minutes. I didn't get to the hour, so I'm really pleased with myself because I thought I'd go over today because I particularly had David as a guest. So I thought we'd run over David. So well done and not running over. So thank you very much. Listen, one last check. Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for the feedback. For storytelling, I love sculpture. Oh, Joe, I like the sound of that. Yes. I'm going to investigate that, but maybe we could have a chat. I think we're talking on Friday anyway, so let's maybe chat more about that. Thanks, Joe. That's a great idea. So, folks, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'll see you next week.